Welcome to When the Senate Wept, a tale of Rome. In the heart of Rome, power whispers through marble halls, but when truth rises, even empires tremble. This is the story of one republic's reckoning, and the day the Senate finally broke, written by Brian M. Brumbaugh, narrated by Ned Rattor. Please subscribe now and bear witness. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Laurel and the Dagger. The sun had just cleared the rooftops of the Forum when Senator Decimus Varro Lucullus ascended the marble steps of the rostra. He walked like a man born to command applause, his crimson-bordered toga trailing behind him like a battle standard. The crowd, merchants, soldiers, patricians, plebeians, parted with the same practised awe they might reserve for a general returning from Gaul. Murmurs gave way to cheers. He raised one hand. They silenced themselves. "Citizens of Rome," he began, voice deep and rich with oratorical rhythm. "Today the gods smile upon us. Today the granaries of the Nile overflow not only with Egypt's bounty, but with Rome's future." He held aloft a scroll bearing the seal of Alexandria, its red wax fresh and flawless. Behind him, a delegation of foreign envoys in flowing linen stood respectfully, their expressions unreadable. "The treaty I have secured ensures grain shipments for the next 7 years, free of tariff, blessed by Pharaoh's seal, and escorted by our own navy. No Roman child will know hunger this season. No mother will bury her babe for want of bread." The Forum roared. From the steps of the Temple of Concord, Tribune Gaius Severus Aquila watched in tight-lipped silence. He'd heard Lucullus speak before. The old lion always knew his moment, how to stoke gratitude, cloak ambition, and breathe unity into division. But Gaius saw something different now. Not just grandeur, not just statesmanship. He saw performance, and today of all days it grated, because across the Forum, beyond the shadow of applause, a man was about to die. The execution square smelled of sweat, dust, and old iron. Marcus alias Nerva, scribe of the 3rd Treasury Office, stood bound at the waist and wrists, stripped to his tunic. A shaved patch on his scalp exposed a fresh wound, likely from interrogation. His eyes darted across the crowd as though searching for a face that might yet intervene. No such face emerged. A soldier read the charges aloud: forgery of financial ledgers, falsification of grain census reports, endangerment of state resources, subversion of Senate decrees. Aquila narrowed his gaze. Something didn't sit right. Nerva wasn't a revolutionary. He was a quiet, bespectacled man who dealt in numbers, not knives. His handwriting had once won him accolades from Lucullus himself. The same Lucullus now raising a treaty scroll like a trophy. The executioner's axe rose. Nerva's lips moved, a prayer or a name. The blade fell. The crowd barely noticed. Their attention was on the thunderous ovation as Lucullus descended the rostra and embraced a visiting Egyptian ambassador. Aquila turned his head away from both scenes. That was when he saw her. She wore the white robes of a Vestal, though no flame adorned her brow. Her hair was dark, braided, half shrouded by her hood. Her eyes, pale and sharp, met his across the square with the stillness of water before a storm. She didn't flinch when the axe struck. She didn't look away from the blood. She looked only at him, Livia Caeliana, though he didn't know her name yet. Not then. She turned without a word and vanished into the colonnade. That night, Aquila returned to his family's crumbling domus on the Caelian hill. The mosaics were cracked, the courtyard dry. His father's death had left him with debts and shadows, not legacies, but it was quiet. He removed his belt and sat alone with a goblet of diluted wine, listening to the wind stir the grapevines. Rome, even at night, groaned like an old beast in its sleep. Then came the knock. 3 soft raps. Silence. 2 more. Aquila opened the door slowly. No one stood there. Only a scroll, tied with black twine, sealed with no crest, no signet, only a smear of red ink pressed into wax. He brought it to the light, unrolled it. A single line, written in a careful, steady hand. The Republic is bleeding. Follow the ink. Chapter 2. Ashes of Integrity. Smoke still clung to the brickwork like old grief. The domus of Marcus Aelius Nerva had been reduced to rubble and ash. What hadn't been burned had been taken. Furniture splintered, scroll racks overturned. Even the family shrine, usually spared by custom, was desecrated, its layers toppled and scattered like bones. Tribune Gaius Severus Aquila crouched in what remained of the scribe's atrium, brushing soot from a scorched scrap of papyrus. The ink had bled from heat, but one line, barely legible, lingered. Censor's audit withheld, by order of Varro. He read it 3 times. The neighbours claimed the fire was an accident, a cooking flame, a drunk slave. Anything but the truth. Aquila knew better. This was not chance. It was cleansing, political and total. He stood, adjusting the folds of his toga. The urban cohorts had arrived before the fire was even cold. Praetor Manius Scavapulcher's men had carted away every ledger, every scroll, every living witness, even Nerva's widow. That night, Aquila moved through the Subura district like a ghost, hood drawn, eyes watchful. Rome was alive with tension. Whispers moved faster than soldiers. The grain treaty had brought celebration, but also unrest. Vendors jacking prices, bakeries raided, mobs forming over rumours of grain being hoarded by the elite. In the forum, Lucullus had demanded emergency edicta be passed, granting him control over all municipal grain stocks to ensure distribution and protect public order. The Senate approved it. Of course they did. Aquila's fingers curled into fists beneath his cloak. The first sign he was being followed came as a whisper of leather behind him. Too deliberate, too heavy, not a drunk, not a whore, not a merchant's runner, a shadow with purpose. Then another. He turned down a narrow alley near the ruins of Pompey's theatre, eyes scanning every window, every rooftop. He was not alone. He quickened his pace and found her waiting. Livia Caeliana stood beneath the archway of a collapsed aqueduct, her white robes now a dusk-stained grey, her hood casting her features in half-shadow. "You shouldn't be here," Aquila hissed. "And yet," she replied, "here we both are." She held out a scroll, not sealed, not signed, but tied with gold twine. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "From within the temple archives. A ledger hidden beneath a second name. Not forged, just misplaced. Clever, really." He unrolled it quickly. Columns of numbers, disbursements to legions that had already returned to Rome, funds diverted to auxiliary reconstruction that never happened, signatures, scribes, stamped by treasury clerks, all approved by Lucullus. "This is a death sentence," he whispered. "For him?" she said. "Or for us?" Before he could ask more, she was gone, vanishing into the crumbling dark like a spirit fleeing sacrilege. He didn't make it far before the trap snapped shut. 3 men stepped from the shadows, blades drawn, faces wrapped in cloth. No demands, no questions, just death. Aquila backed into a wall, hand slipping under his cloak for the dagger he barely had time to draw. The first assailant lunged. Aquila dodged, barely. Steel scraped his shoulder. The second came from the side, knife flashing toward his ribs. Then a crack, a thud, and a scream. The man dropped like meat. A club, no, a sword hilt, smashed into his skull from behind. A new figure emerged from the alley mouth, massive, cloaked, limping slightly. His left eye was gone, just a deep, weathered scar running down his cheek like a river carved into stone. The third attacker turned and ran. The figure didn't chase. Instead, he turned to Aquila and offered a hand. "Tribune?" he said, voice rough with rust. "I believe we have business." Aquila took his hand, wincing. "Name?" he smirked. "Once. Titus Vorenus Drusus, General of the 4th, dead officially, but I seem to be walking." Aquila stared at him. The name was legend. A war hero vanished under accusations of insubordination and treason, supposedly hanged. "Why help me?" he asked. Vorenus's smile faded. "Because I know what happens when Lucullus calls a man guilty." Chapter 3. The Vestal's Ledger. The Temple of Vesta stood like a whisper among the louder monuments of Rome. It wasn't the tallest nor the grandest, but it was the oldest. The flame within had burned uninterrupted for over 1,000 years. Except now, that flame lit the face of a woman who no longer believed in it. Livia Caeliana crouched in the hidden vault beneath the temple's eastern wall, holding a scroll that should not exist. The ink was old, imperial era, but the entries were updated recently. She unrolled it carefully, revealing rows of names and figures. The handwriting matched her brother's, meticulous, sharp, honest. It detailed diverted funds from the provinces of Hispania and Illyricum, land holdings transferred under duress, army stipends cut short, and at the end of each transaction, a name sealed in abbreviated authority, DVL Decimus Varro Lucullus. She exhaled slowly. Her brother, Caelianus, had worked as a junior scribe for the Senate's Land Allocation Commission. He'd come to her months ago, whispering of discrepancies, a missing farm here, a delayed soldier's pension there. She had warned him to stay silent. Now he was dead, hung in his cell under charges of extortion. The ledger proved what he died trying to reveal. That same night, on the crumbling Caelian hill, Tribune Aquila lifted a loose stone slab in the floor of his father's wine cellar. A musty draught of stale earth and mildew struck his nose. By torchlight, the face of Titus Vorenus Drusus appeared from the dark. "I've slept worse," Vorenus muttered as he climbed up, stretching his bad leg. "You should have left the city," Aquila replied, handing him a crust of bread and a flask of sour wine. "And miss the fun?" Vorenus sat against the wall. His breath was shallow, still recovering from the ambush, but his eyes were alive now, watching, calculating. "This Lucullus," he said, "he's moving fast, faster than I expected. You're playing checkers against a man who's rewriting the board." The next morning, Lucullus returned to the rostra. He didn't climb the steps as a senator this time. He climbed them like a general. Behind him stood Praetor Pulcher, flanked by urban cohorts in full armour. Their presence in the forum was illegal without Senate approval, but no one dared protest. "Citizens of Rome," Lucullus bellowed, "the Nile gives grain, the gods give breath, but subversives, they give us fire." The crowd hushed. He held up a burnt scroll, allegedly recovered from a warehouse riot 2 days prior. Whether the riot existed was irrelevant. It was theatre. There are those among us who would poison this city from within, who would rot her pillars while cloaked in white or gold or honour. These cowards, these traitors, sow unrest, then scurry into the shadows. He slammed his fist on the podium. "I propose a tempore decree, lex custodia, granting emergency surveillance authority to my office. Limited in time, absolute in purpose." The cheers from the soldiers drowned out the murmurs of unease from the crowd. That night, Livia returned to her cell in the temple. The vault was sealed, the scrolls secured. She had hidden a duplicate ledger beneath the stones of her sleeping mat, wrapped in linen, scented with herbs to mask the parchment's age. But something was wrong. The mat had shifted, the scent had faded, the linen was damp. She dropped to her knees. The ledger was gone. Her pulse thundered. She checked the vault, intact. The shrine, undisturbed, the flame, still burning. And then she saw it. Pressed into the beeswax seal of her personal scroll jar, once untouched by any hand but hers, was a small, crude impression. A lion's head. Chapter 4. Aquila's Gambit. The Curia Julia was packed, and every man inside smelled of fear, sweat, or rosewater, meant to hide the former. Beneath the coffered ceiling and watching eyes of marble busts, Tribune Gaius Severus Aquila held the scrolls in his shaking hand and stepped forward. "Fathers of Rome," he began, voice loud but measured, "the evidence is before you. Missing grain shipments, false legions, funds allocated to ghost campaigns. And at the centre of these falsehoods, one name recurs." He placed the scrolls on the speaker's altar. Lucullus. The silence hit like thunder. At the far end of the chamber, seated with the calm of a predator just before the strike, Senator Decimus Varro Lucullus didn't blink. He didn't protest. He simply turned and nodded to the man beside him. Praetor Manius Sceva Pulcher rose, his voice sharp as glass. "These are forged documents. Lies passed to a naive tribune by seditionists and traitors. You stand here, Aquila, not as a tribune of the plebs, but as a conspirator against the Republic." Gasps followed, not from surprise, but from permission. Pulcher's accusation had opened the floodgates. Senators began to mutter, to murmur, to lean and whisper. Aquila raised his hands. "Read them yourselves. Examine the seals, the ink, the handwriting. My only conspiracy is to protect the truth," but no one moved. Pulcher circled him like a beast in a training ring. "You met in secret with foreign agents. You hid a known fugitive. You accepted scrolls of unknown origin, likely tampered with." Aquila's voice cracked. "And what did you do, Praetor? What did you burn in the Subura last week? What scrolls did you take from Nerva's home?" That struck deeper than the room admitted. But Pulcher didn't falter. He pointed directly at Aquila. "I move for his immediate censure." Later that afternoon, the sacred steps of the Temple of Vestal were sealed. Livia Caeliana stood behind the bronze gates, her hands clenched around the folds of her robe. A decree had arrived bearing the Senate's seal, authored by Lucullus himself. The priestess, known as Livia Caeliana, is hereby confined to the temple grounds under suspicion of conspiracy until such time that her involvement is clarified. It was phrased politely. It was a prison. Even the other Vestals avoided her eyes. The high priestess merely gave her a silent nod of acknowledgment, sorrowful but unwilling to interfere. The flame in the centre of the chamber burned steady, but Livia had never felt so cold. Across the city, in the flickering torchlight of a tavern near the Campus Martius, Titus Vorenus Drusus stood, hunched over a bowl of stew, hood drawn low. Too low. The barkeep recognized him, or rather, the barkeep's customer did. Lucius Calvus, once a centurion in the northern legions under Vorenus's command. His jaw twitched. His hand drifted to the hilt of his dagger. "I thought you were dead," Calvus muttered. Vorenus didn't look up. "So did the gods. You know what a bounty like yours would pay?" Vorenus finally looked him in the eyes. "Enough to bury your entire bloodline when Pulcher no longer finds you useful." A pause. Then steel scraped from leather. He never made it to the door. 3 urban cohorts stormed in with hoods and chains. Vorenus fought, took down 2 with fists and overturned stools, but the 3rd drove a truncheon into his knee. He dropped like a stone. "Tell Lucullus," he spat through blood, "he'll need more than a vote to silence me." That vote came the next morning. Behind closed doors and barred gates, the Senate held a private session. No scribes, no public record. Lucullus spoke only once. "Rome is not under threat from the outside," he said. "She is being eaten from within. I do not seek power. I seek order. Give me the means, and I will restore her balance." And so, by a margin of 54 to 11, the Senate passed the Lex Imperium Interitus, granting Lucullus interim authority over the city's defences, internal investigations, and grain distribution. Aquila stood alone on the southern road as the gates of Rome creaked shut behind him. No trial, no defence, just exile. The wind howled across the hills. A boy, no older than 15, approached him from behind, dressed in the leathers of the urban cohorts. He saluted. Aquila handed him a ring bearing his family's seal. "Get inside. Keep your head down. If you survive, I'll find you." The boy nodded. "What should I look for, Tribune?" Aquila didn't hesitate. Anything bearing the mark of a lion. Chapter 5. Vorenus the Dead. The execution was held at dawn, as all public deaths deemed treasonous now were. A raised platform had been built near the field of Mars. Spectators gathered in eerie silence. Soldiers from the urban cohorts surrounding the platform like statues, their faces hidden beneath iron helms. No applause, no jeers. Only the soft rustle of togas and the click of sandals on stone. Titus Vorenus Drusus stood tall in chains, a linen hood over his head. His mouth was bound. His left leg shook faintly, old wound flaring, but he never begged. Praetor Pulcher read the sentence aloud. By authority of the Senate and people of Rome, for treason, sedition, and conspiracy with foreign powers, the traitor Titus Vorenus is condemned to die. The axe was raised, a few turned away, the blade came down, blood spilled, or appeared to. The crowd dispersed quickly, too quickly. No one noticed that the body was never displayed. No coin placed on the tongue, no procession to the pyre. And when the soldiers lifted the body to carry it away, it twitched. 2 hours later, in a farmhouse, an hour outside the city, Vorenus ripped the false blood-soaked linen from his chest and sat up, coughing. "Gods," he muttered, "that dye tastes worse than actual blood." "Be grateful it wasn't your throat," replied the man beside him. Marcus Veturius, former Optio under his command, now one of Aquila's quiet allies. They had bribed the executioner, replaced the axe with a notched prop, drugged Vorenus just enough to mimic unconsciousness. The cost had been high. 5 men loyal to Aquila were already missing, but Vorenus was alive. And now, in the rolling hills north of Rome, in a half-burned villa once belonging to a retired centurion, the old general began to rebuild. They came by 1s and 2s, wounded soldiers, disgraced officers, veterans discarded after the legions disbanded, men with scars, with debts, with grudges, and with memories. They still called him legatus. They still followed his voice. He trained them in silence, through storms and heat, in the fields by moonlight. They had no banners, no pay, no empire behind them, but they had him. Meanwhile, in the city Aquila once called home, Lucullus moved like a surgeon, cold, clinical, methodical. Every senator who had ever voted against him was summoned, questioned, then reassigned or quietly removed. Some were accused of fraud, others vanished entirely. A few were rediscovered floating in the Tiber, weighted with marble busts of their ancestors, and every time one disappeared, another bent the knee a little faster. Lucullus gave speeches about purity and the moral rebirth of Rome. He held games in honour of fallen senators. He declared a month of stability, but behind the words, Aquila saw what was happening. The Republic was being hollowed out. From exile, Aquila travelled under false names, sometimes as a grain merchant, sometimes as a tutor. He moved through Latium, Etruria, and the southern countryside, speaking to old equites, retired magistrates, rural priests, and bitter clients. He carried no scrolls, only stories of ledgers, of betrayals, of a general executed unjustly, of the lion's claws tightening around Rome's throat. Some listened, some laughed, but enough of them said the same thing. Tell us when to move. One night, a young senator, Quintus Rutilius, was found outside his domus, screaming. His child, only 6 years old, had not returned from his morning lessons. A search began immediately. They found the boy's body before sunrise, just inside the curious gates, nestled in the folds of his father's senatorial cloak. No wounds, no blood, but pressed into the wax of his toy scroll case was a lion's claw. Not a mark, an actual claw, dipped in oil, sealed in wax, left where only a father would look. The message was clear. Lucullus no longer needed to win hearts. He would take them, one beat at a time. Chapter 6. The Praetor's Teeth. Rome did not sleep, not under Praetor Manius Sceva Pulcher's command. By decree of Lucullus's Lex Imperium Interitus, Rome entered a city-wide lockdown. The Forum, once a place of debate and bread vendors, now echoed with the heavy tread of iron-nailed sandals and the barked orders of the urban cohorts. Temples were searched, taverns shuttered, public bathhouses cleared. Every citizen became suspect, and those accused of aiding sedition were not arrested so much as removed. Some screamed, most simply vanished. In the temple of Vesta, Livia's cell no longer smelled of sacred oils. It stank of watchfulness. 2 guards had been posted outside her door, not temple guards, Pulcher's men, and worse, one of the other Vestals had stopped speaking to her. Fear had become doctrine, but even fear could crack. It came in the form of Nisa, a kitchen slave with rough hands and clever eyes. She brought Livia her evening meal, barley mash, olives, and a fig. Inside the fig was a folded scrap of fabric, black cotton, torn from a mourning veil. Nisa's voice was barely audible. Midnight, cellar tunnel, be quick or be caught. That night, Livia wrapped herself in rags and veils, staining her face with ash from the kitchen hearth. Nisa opened the passage behind the wine rack. Together they slipped beneath the temple, past buried urns, crumbling altars, and the bones of forgotten guardians. They emerged into the night under a full moon, just as torches lit the skyline near the Subura district. Smoke was rising. Rome was beginning to snap. The lockdown had turned bread lines into powder kegs. A grain riot erupted after a baker was accused of profiteering. The urban cohorts responded by dragging his sons into the street and beating them in front of the crowd. By dusk, 2 cohort barracks had been torched, and 5 patrolmen were missing. Pulcher's response was swift. a public crucifixion outside the Circus Maximus. 3 suspected agitators were hung on iron stakes, while citizens were forced to watch. The riot didn't stop, it spread. By nightfall, the Aventine burned. In the chaos, Livia moved through back alleys and broken courtyards like a shadow. News of the murdered child had become myth. People whispered of the lion's claw as if it were divine punishment. Some blamed foreigners, others blamed Lucullus, but most were simply afraid. Until Livia stood on the steps of the Curia, she climbed the marble in silence, flanked only by the flicker of torchlight and the press of a frightened, furious crowd. Her veil dropped to the ground, her face, hollow, soot-streaked, defiant, tilted upward toward the Senate building, and then she spoke. "Do you hear them?" she shouted, voice raw. "The people you claim to protect? Do you smell their fear, their smoke?" Crowds gathered, even the soldiers paused. "You burn temples, you crucify bakers, you bleed children, and for what?" The Curia's doors creaked. A figure appeared at the top, Lucullus himself, in full senatorial regalia, his face unreadable. Pulcher stood at his side, hand on the sword hilt. Livia pointed directly at them. "The lion is no longer protecting Rome, it is feeding on her." The square fell silent, and then someone in the crowd threw a cobblestone, then another. A scream rang out. Soldiers surged forward. Livia vanished into the mob. Chapter 7. The Temple Burns. No one spoke when the smoke rose from the Temple of Vesta. It started as a rumour, priests whispering that fire had escaped the sacred chamber. Then, by noon, word spread that it was no accident. By sunset, the truth was undeniable. Lucullus had ordered it. To root out conspiracy, he claimed, standing before a stunned Senate, the embers still glowing in his cloak from his inspection. The temple, like the Forum, is no longer sacred if it harbours sedition. This flame, which has burned since the days of Numa, must be tested as all things must be, by fire and judgment. Even Pulcher's lips tightened at that. Burning a part of Rome's holiest site, the eternal flame itself, was not just a political act, it was sacrilege. But Lucullus stood unbothered, framed in gold light and marble dust, voice clear as prophecy. If even the gods fear order, then perhaps they too must be judged. The outer wing of the temple collapsed at dusk. 2 novices died, crushed by stonework. And Livia Caeliana, still healing from her last escape, fled again, this time bleeding from her thigh, ash smearing her face, escorted only by a limping Nysa and a frightened boy priest who barely knew her name. They ran through the catacombs, dodging collapsed beams, gasping against the heat. Livia stumbled but did not fall. When they emerged from a forgotten wine drain beneath the Palatine, Rome no longer felt like home. It felt like a grave. A day later, in the shadowed ruins of an abandoned equestrian villa outside Veii, Tribune Gaius Aquila returned, dressed in rags, haggard, angry, but very much alive. Vorenus met him at the gate, flanked by 36 hardened veterans, some with armour cobbled from farms and stolen barracks. They trained with swords, spears, slings, whatever they could carry. "A lot has changed," Vorenus said, nodding toward the city in the distance. "I noticed," Aquila replied. "The sky's darker." That night, Aquila unveiled the dagger he'd been sharpening for weeks. Not steel, but words. A scroll, thin, cracked from smuggling, the ink smeared in one corner, but legible. A stolen Senate speech draft, bearing Lucullus's seal and corrections in his own hand. It read, "Let elections be suspended for the duration of internal investigations." Authority, consolidated, will ensure stability. If unrest continues, move toward emergency consulship, indefinite term, end of republic, inevitable. The illusion persists only until we withdraw the mask. They released it at midnight, copied, spread through temples, taverns, brothels, bakeries, anywhere people still whispered and feared. By morning, Rome erupted, but not in the streets, in the Senate. Minor tribunes, previously silent, junior, irrelevant, seized the opportunity. Backed by angry clerks, palace scribes, and even a few sympathetic patricians, they stormed the rostra. Lucullus was not there. Pulcher was, and for the first time he hesitated. He called for calm. They threw bread at him, then scrolls, then torches. As chaos engulfed the forum, banners bearing the lion's claw were ripped down and replaced with a crude sigil, a wheat stalk crossed with a broken blade, Aquila's symbol. The Republic was bleeding, but now it was bleeding loud. Chapter 8. The Lion Roars. The Curia, Julia, had never seen so many soldiers. Not in civil war, not in the sack of Gaul, not in any moment since Romulus claimed his brother's hill, but on this morning, Decimus Varro Lucullus, the so-called Lion of Rome, marched through the forum with 500 cohorts at his back and a crimson cloak dragging behind him like a river of blood. The Senate doors opened for him without summons. Pulcher followed at his side, jaw clenched like stone. His hand never left his sword. Lucullus's voice boomed, "Rome bleeds because she refuses the knife. Today I become her surgeon. By decree of stability and survival, I accept the mantle of consul for life." There were no votes, no cheers, only silence, and the shudder of something ancient being broken. Outside the city walls, Aquila and Vorenus watched the forum's rooftops from an old aqueduct arch. The veterans they had trained now numbered over 200. Ex-legionaries, plebeian volunteers, even a few retired gladiators. They wore mismatched armour, bore painted shields, and passed wineskin and whispers in equal measure. Vorenus grunted, "If you're waiting for the gods, Tribune, they've already packed up and left." Aquila didn't smile. "No, they're waiting, same as us." The Aventine rose first, barricades made of overturned carts, spears thrust from upper windows, Roman citizens fighting Roman soldiers, not for gold or loot, but for breath. Livia stood atop the Temple of Ceres, flanked by 3 surviving Vestals, their robes torn but faces calm. She raised her arms as fire lit the skyline behind her. "This is not order. This is a coffin. Do not follow him into it." Some dropped their weapons, some charged anyway. By midday, fighting reached the forum. Aquila led the charge from the west, his shield painted with a broken lion in black pitch. Vorenus took the east gate, torch in one hand, sword in the other, shouting orders as arrows fell like wasps. Pulcher stood in front of the Senate doors, watching Lucullus deliver a second speech from the steps of the rostra. He watched the blood pool near the statue of Mars. He watched a mother scream over her dead son's body, then throw a brick. He watched a priest slit his own throat in protest. Then he moved. Mid-sentence, Lucullus turned to the crowd, arms raised in triumph, and Pulcher struck him across the face. Gasps. Swords drawn. Pulcher shouted loud enough to stop even the marching soldiers. "You claim to be Rome's lion, but lions do not rule by fear. They do not feed on children. They do not burn gods." He tore the laurel crown from Lucullus's head. "By the authority I still hold, I place you under arrest." The cohorts hesitated. One raised a gladius, another lowered his shield, and the crowd surged forward, not in rage but in awe. Lucullus did not resist. His lip bled, his jaw twitched. His eyes, once so sharp, flicked left, then down. He had lost. By nightfall the siege was over. The fires dimmed, the barricades fell. Aquila leaned against the base of the rostra, blood on his brow, staring at the stars above. Vorenus stood beside him, cloak in tatters, one hand over his ribs. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Vorenus grunted, "We won." Aquila didn't nod. He just whispered, "At what cost?" Chapter 9. The Last Vote. The Curia was cold. Even with torches lining the marble walls and the summer sun creeping through the oculus, a chill lingered, like something holy had left and not returned. Tribune Gaius Severus Aquila stood in the centre, wrapped in a dark cloak, his hand steady as he held the scroll. No blood on this one, just ink. Behind him, 2 soldiers, not urban cohorts, but veterans loyal to Vorenus, stood with spears grounded and expressions like tombs. The Senate had gathered, fewer in number now. Some seats remained empty, a few occupied by men not worthy of the title. And at the front, shackled, stripped of his crimson, head held unnaturally high, sat Decimus Varro Lucullus. He said nothing. He didn't need to. He still looked like a man capable of speaking the world back into his favour. Aquila's voice filled the chamber. "This scroll contains the names of every senator, every magistrate, every priest and clerk that took coin or title to betray the Republic." He unrolled it fully. It reached the floor. The ledgers were sealed in the temple vaults. The witness was a Vestal. The funds came through forged grain contracts, falsified legion reports, and estates gifted under duress. He paused. But this is not just about theft. This is about precedent. About power used not in crisis, but created by crisis, and then used to justify the taking of everything. He looked directly at Lucullus. "We are here not to ask whether Lucullus saved Rome. We are here to ask whether a man who saves a city has the right to then own it." Silence, then movement. The vote began. One by one, senators stood, spoke, and sat again. Exile, 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 no punishment. He did what had to be done. Death, exile, exile. The final count, 72-11. Exile, not death, not forgiveness. A message, a compromise, a coward's justice, or a wise restraint, depending on who you asked. Lucullus smirked as the sentence was read aloud. Decimus Varro Lucullus, former consul, is hereby stripped of title and command. You are sentenced to permanent exile to the island of Ponza. You will never return. You will never speak again in this chamber. May the gods judge what we could not. He was escorted from the floor, but Aquila didn't move. He stood even as the others began to file out. That night, beneath the Casa Tullianum, Lucullus sat on a stone bench, still in chains. A clay bowl of stew was left beside him. He didn't eat it. He just stared at the wall. When the guards returned at dawn, he was still seated. His eyes were open. His lips were blue. The bowl remained untouched. But his fingers, they were stained red. On the wall beside him, written in blood, Rome cannot be ruled, only survived. Chapter 10. When the Senate wept. A year passed. The statues came down first. Lucullus's likeness, chiselled in flawless marble near the Temple of Saturn, was dragged through the forum and shattered on the same steps where he once declared himself consul for life. The Senate voted unanimously to rename the forum's central square Piazza Concordia, the Square of Peace. It didn't last, but it made for good ceremony. The urban cohorts were disbanded and restructured. The Tribune Council was reinstated. now with full oversight over Senate decrees and budgetary allocations. No single man could hold both civil and military command again, not without triggering what they now called the Lex Varro clause, named after the one who almost swallowed Rome whole. Titus Vorenus Drusus stood beneath the olive trees near the Caelian gate and watched recruits spar in the dirt. Aquila had sent an offer, legatus again, command the new guard, clean slate. Vorenus burned the letter. He had buried too many men, bled on too many stones, killed too many boys who'd never known what they were dying for. He simply said, "Let younger hands carry the sword now." Livia Caeliana left no note, only a sealed scroll delivered to the temple, marked in her own hand. They found her on the bank of the Tiber at dawn, her feet in the water, her robes white again. No violence, no struggle, just peace. Her writings, an anthology of meditations, poetry, and reflections on justice, were placed in the temple archives under sacred lock. Among them, one passage read, "I was never a rebel, only a witness, and sometimes that is enough to be condemned." Aquila aged quickly. His face creased, his shoulders stooped. He no longer walked like a tribune, but like a man who had carried a dying god on his back and was still waiting for the thunder. He remained in the Senate. He no longer raised his voice. He didn't need to. When he stood, others listened. When he frowned, the younger senators reconsidered. The scrolls he once used to call out corruption now rested in an iron-bound box beside his seat, silent but present. Rome moved on, but never too far. On the 10th anniversary of Lucullus's sentencing, a small ceremony was held in the Curia. No speeches, no statues, only silence and tears. Some said it was for the lives lost. Others claimed it was for Livia or Vorenus or the many unnamed souls burned by the fire of ambition. But Aquila knew better. He looked up at the oculus where daylight poured like judgment into the chamber and thought, Rome would not remember the names, but it would remember the silence, the day the Senate wept, not for the man who fell, but for the republic that almost followed the end. Author's note. Thank you for joining me on this journey through When the Senate Wept. This was a story about ambition, silence, and the fragile thread that holds a republic together. I hope it left you thinking, as all Roman history should. If you enjoyed the story, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more tales like this to life, and your voice keeps the Senate honest. Until next time, strength and honour, Brian M. Brumbaugh.